Welcome to the Bible Savvy Podcast, a weekly conversation about how to understand, enjoy, and apply God's Word. It's time to jump into a new passage from the Bible Savvy reading plan.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Bible Savvy Podcast. I'm here with Pastor Courtney and Pastor David. And David, what is the question today?
Well, before we get to the question, guys, happy 2025.
Hey.
Brand new year, right?
Are we in a new year, though?
We are. Definitely.
This is very...
But yeah, 2025 is here, and as with any new year comes New Year's resolutions. And I'm curious if you guys have any resolutions. So our Bible Savvy Nation can hold you accountable to your resolutions 6 months from now.
Oh, that's scary.
Yeah.
Say, hey, I remember you said.
Are you still doing that?
But yeah. or if you don't have resolutions, tell us why.
Yeah, I am. I like how you both looked at me right away.
I'm going to read my Bible every day.
My resolution is to read the Bible Savvy readings. There's my resolution.
Wow.
Wow.
There it is.
That's what all of your resolutions are.
Yes. I am not really a resolution maker. I am a big goal setter. Like, I love to set goals and meet goals and be like, okay, 3 months later, do I have other goals that I want? So I don't know that I've ever really called them New Year's resolutions. It's goals that I have, but I tend to try to make them pretty attainable. So it's not I guess if I was going to make a resolution, I would do more of a 30 days out, 60 days out, 90 days out. The goal is, what's the goal at the end of this?
Oh, yeah.
And then what does that look like to get there?
And which color marker do you use when you attain the goal?
Goals. Actually, one year we did do this as a family.
Oh.
And we had, so everybody wrote their goals down and we
you kept
had
your tree
colors.
all year
And, yeah, there were, yes.
And the tree has never come down.
That's how it started.
My resolution's not very interesting, but it's to do some more journaling. So there's some things end of the day kinds of things that I think would be helpful. I've done this in the past where it's you note what you did and who you interacted with and kind of do a little reflecting. It helps you not just kind of rush from job to home and sort of be in the muddle of I'm just going from thing to thing to thing. You actually feel okay, I had a little bit of self-assessment, a little bit of sense of accomplishment, a little bit of gratitude, some next steps for tomorrow. And so I'm going to try to do that. It's not a strong resolution in the sense of I'm really going to get on myself if I don't do this. But it's hey, let's give it a season and try and do this for a little while. I do actually think resolutions are good, not because you usually keep them, but they've actually done studies where they say if people tend to end up with healthier patterns overall if they have moments in their year or their life that are milestones where they kind of turn a corner and say, I'm going to work hard on something. It's not the follow through on that particular thing, but it's the overall sense of growth and improvement that happens, that it helps to have those things. So I used to sort of be no one ever keeps them, but now I'm no, actually it's better to say I'm going to intentionally try something than to never intentionally try something.
Oh yeah,
It's
sure,
true.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so this last month, the day before Thanksgiving, my doctor called me. I had my annual physical, which I've never had an issue with the annual physical. It's been okay, yeah, everything's great, whatever, go exercise or something like that, and they'll send me away. So I haven't really thought about it. But this is the first year they called and said, David, you need to change some of your eating habits. And this is the day before Thanksgiving they called me. And I said, why did you call me today? Why don't call me on Friday? Call me the day after Thanksgiving and tell me I need to change some of my eating habits.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
And so I've sort of been reeling since that conversation, but I've been kind of diving into the food world and actually reading ingredient labels.
Is diving into the food world what they recommended? We just need you to dive into the food world. We think you'll be healthier.
I love diving into the food world.
I put a couple toes in and
maybe get out of the food world.
Just go fast, please. Just fast. So anyway, I literally, in fact, this past weekend, I spent hours at the grocery store just reading labels of everything.
Wow.
And blocking people from getting their food because I'm sitting here trying to read every label and everything. And so I am very resolved now in the new year to eat better and to eat the right things and buy the thing that says lower sodium and less fat and all the different things that taste a little bit not as good, but are healthier for you. So that is I'm saying this will be great accountability from the church.
Wow.
So,
There you go.
ask me if I've had a vegetable recently.
Okay. Give him all your advice.
All right, we are in a new book of the Bible for the new year. We are in the book of Exodus. Exodus is the second book in the Old Testament, one of the books of Moses. We read Genesis earlier in the fall. We took a little bit of a break, but now we are back continuing the same storyline. So where Genesis left off was where the people of Israel, which at that point are about 70 people, they travel down to Egypt because Joseph has become a leader there. There's a famine in the land, and that's the place where they can get food. And so they all move down there. So the entire family, all of Jacob's family is down there. And they settle down, they get some land, and they're doing okay. When you turn the page and open up to Exodus 1, you get a little bit of recap of that, but then it goes like this. And then a king came along who did not know Joseph. Essentially what that means, it's a shorthand version for there was a regime change. There was a new dynasty. And so instead of it being a dynasty that was friendly to the Israelites, it was a dynasty that was hostile. And we don't know all the details, but they end up enslaved to this new pharaoh. And they are working and making things and being oppressed. And they're crying out to God. And part of what's going on here is the Pharaoh is like a god in the land. And so what he says goes. And so he puts himself on the top. And that means anytime you put something that isn't God on the top, it means that those on the bottom are going to get oppressed. Idolatry leads to injustice in the Bible. And so Pharaoh is oppressing the Israelites. The Israelites are doing great in some respect. They are incredibly fruitful. So that whole be fruitful and multiply blessing, it was working for them. So they're having lots and lots of kids, which makes the Pharaoh even more scared. Mm-hmm. So he's saying, I'm trying to keep these people down, but they seem to be doing, multiplying. Pretty soon they're going to be able to overthrow me or at least cause some trouble. So I need to oppress them even harder. And so what he ends up doing is he ends up saying, if any of the Hebrew women have a baby boy, you need to kill him. Throw him in the Nile. And obviously this is horrible. There are all sorts of ways that people are trying to get around that. But one particular situation was the story of Moses. Moses, who as a baby was supposed to be killed, gets saved. I won't go into the details about that. But he ends up growing up not only in a Hebrew context, but also being raised in the royal court of Egypt. And so he has this kind of dual cultural thing going on. And when he grows up, he looks at the situation around and sees his people being oppressed. And he says, I'm going to do something about this. And what he tries does not work. Okay. He essentially gets angry, attacks an Egyptian who's oppressing a Hebrew, and kills him. And that goes nowhere fast. And Moses has to run away. He basically says, I'm in trouble here. I need to leave the country. And he goes off into the wilderness. He ends up becoming basically a shepherd and is tending to the sheep of his wife's family. And he is out there doing that when this story starts. But basically, it looks like Moses is at a dead end, right? There's nothing happening. He's
exiled from exile.
Exile from exile. That's right. Guys, so we're going to pick it up in Exodus chapter 3 and read the whole chapter.
All right. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. Go, assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. And I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. The elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that, he will let you go. And I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed towards this people, so that when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in her house for articles of silver and gold and for clothing, which you will put on your sons and daughters, and so you will plunder the Egyptians.
All right, we're going to go on to the O in comma, which is observations. But I did want to make another note about context. Whenever we start a new book, one thing that's helpful is to get an overview of the book. Mm-hmm. And the way we recommend doing that, the first place to stop is the Bible Project. They have great videos that are maybe 6-7 minutes long that cover an entire book. This one might be split into 2. I didn't go look it up before this. I think it's probably 2 videos. But it's a great overview if you want to just get a sense. Usually what I do is I will watch it before I start reading a book, and then partway through, I'll watch it again because it puts some pieces together that I've now just read. Another thing that might be helpful is we are going to post an interview with a scholar of the book of Exodus. Her name is Carmen Imes, and she is a fantastic scholar and a really clear communicator about this, so you'll want to check that out. I don't know if it will have already posted by the time this episode comes out or if it will post soon after this, but it should be around very soon. All right, let's go on to observations. What do you guys see in this passage?
My first observation was right in verse 1. It says that Moses came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And immediately that drew my attention in because immediately I thought, well, what makes it the mountain of God? I'm from Colorado. I love the mountains, and I think all the mountains are like, that's the mountain of God. That's the mountain of God. That's it. But there was something specific here that I felt like Scripture saying, this is the mountain of God. And thankful for my study Bible, I looked in my, at the bottom, and I was reading that, Horeb doesn't just have this burning bush moment. Also, spoiler alert, after the Israelites get out of slavery, the Israelites enter into covenant with God at the mountain of Horeb. Moses receives the 10 Commandments and the law at Horeb. Mm-hmm. God gives instructions for how the people are to proceed toward the promised land. And then even later on, when Elijah has his moment and he's fleeing from Jezebel, he comes to the mountain of God. He comes to Horeb, and God appears to him in that still small whisper, and he receives instructions for what he's to do next. So, in other words, just in verse 1, it's just saying, hey, this is an important place, and you're going to want to remember this place.
Yeah. The word Horeb is probably where some of the confusion is because it's also called Sinai.
Mm-hmm.
And so both of those are just names of the same place. But at first it's like, what are we talking about? Did I miss something?
And he does answer it. If you read the entire thing, he answers it in verse 12. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain.
Yeah.
So that mountain is obviously going to continue to be significant.
What else do you see?
Tending the flock. God likes shepherds. There's a
There's
fondness,
a lot of shepherds.
Fondness for shepherds. That was a
big shepherd theme.
big shepherd guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot in there. I think one big observation just right off the bat is the burning bush, which is like a cultural thing. Like you may like run into that as an idea, but it's a little bit odd, right? Like if it wasn't something that's like, well, it's in the Bible and so I've heard about it before, it's a strange symbol. And so I don't know if I necessarily have an answer to this, but there is certainly the question of why that? You know what I mean? Like God could have appeared or communicated in any way he wanted, but the way he decided to do it was to say, I'm going to light a plant on fire and then I'm going to wait until Moses notices it and says, that's strange.
Something striking.
Striking, right? And then I'm going to speak to him from that. I mean, I think there's something to the symbolism of fire, right?
Yeah.
Like there's something about the holiness of God's presence, which comes up in this passage, and God's often called a consuming fire. There's something both dangerous and attractive about God, you know what I mean? Which is what fire is like. There's all these things that are evocative of that, but it's still just a little strange. You know what I mean? It's not like it's a thing that happens multiple times even in the Bible. This is like the one and done of the burning bush, at least, in this form.
Yeah.
It also says the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flames, and then the Lord is speaking to him.
Yes.
It seems like two different entities.
Yeah. You think God like put the angel there and say, "Hey, just let me know when he comes around."
Hey, just watch for it, and then okay, hey, I got him on the line.
He's here.
Here it comes.
There is there's an ambiguity when you see the angel of the Lord. A lot of times it is God appearing in the form of an angel. Okay, so there's like sometimes there is angels of the Lord, which are just messengers of God, and sometimes there is the angel of the Lord, which is God himself manifesting as an angel. And so there's a little bit of kind of you'll see this in stories from time to time where you're saying, wait, I thought it was an angel. Oh yeah, it's like that.
Yeah. I was just going to mention too that the Lord God calls to him 2 times. He says, Moses, Moses, and Moses says, here I am. And we have seen that before. He did it to Abraham. I mean, Samuel gets a few calls before he's like, here I am. And it's like, multiple times that God calls out a name and then the response is here I am. And it's always like a call and a servant open-handedness. I feel like anytime we've seen that.
Yeah, it becomes sort of the standard pattern. God calls your name and you say, here I am, and then
but would you?
Because there's always a little bit of like, and now what are you in for? You know what I mean? It's the right answer. But you might have to confront Pharaoh, or if you're Mary, like have a baby, right? Like there's all of these things.
Yeah.
Like,
it's true.
Here I am. This is what happens.
I really loved verse 7, where God says, "I've seen the misery, I've heard them crying out, and I am concerned." So God sees, God hears, that God feels, and then God gets into action. I don't feel like Scripture gives us a lot of views this early on of God's emotional state, but to hear that God is seeing this, he's hearing this, he's paying attention, and he actually has an emotional response to what the Israelites are going through. It's revealing God's character.
I think also the responses of Moses. So, here I am, and then it's like, who am I? And then God says, he doesn't answer that. He doesn't answer who he is. He says, well, I'm with you. Not, I'm not going to answer your question. And then Moses says, well, who are you? And God says, well, I am who I am. And just the responses of Moses were really striking to me. Like, who am I? Who are you? Here I am. Who am I? And who are you?
Yeah, I had not noticed that God doesn't answer the question directly when he says, because Moses is looking for reassurance, right? Like, so it's not necessarily our modern like identity question, like tell me who I am. It's like how in the world you just gave me this incredible assignment that seems impossible.
Yeah,
but I'm like, I killed a guy, ran away. I've been in the desert taking care of sheep for decades. Yep. Like why in the world me? Yep. And God simply does not address that.
Nope.
There's not one statement about it. And we're going to see Moses kind of presses him on it. He's like, really? You want to send me? You want to send me? And in the next chapter, God's like, Okay, stop it, Moses.
Yeah.
I know we didn't go into it even further, but there are more questions and answers that happen.
And this one.
I do love that he's sort of like, Moses, you're asking the wrong question.
Yeah.
The question is, will you be with me? Like, yes, I'm going to be with you. Like, it's not it's not nothing about you, Moses. It's like, I'll be there. And also, thanks to my study Bible, it also pointed me to the New Testament in John 8, where Jesus kind of talks about his own divinity. He's referring, when he talks about I am the I am, like he's referring back to here, which he knew his listeners would remember from this story in Exodus 3, which is pretty significant.
Yeah. Yeah. It comes up knowing. So we should talk about the name here, but to comment on the New Testament stuff, one of the things that shows in the New Testament, when someone says, well, Jesus never claimed to be God, or, did the New Testament authors think that Jesus was God, or they think he was just a man, and we later kind of, attributed divinity to him. One of the things that shows it is that he regularly uses titles, and in particular this one, for himself, or people will use that title for him, and he will not deflect it. And nobody who took this story seriously would say, oh yeah, I can just casually use that title for myself. It would be so blasphemous that, in fact, when Jesus does it, they decide they want to stone him. So some of that is like in the context, knowing this story helps you see that Jesus is making really strong claims when he starts to come around. But let's talk about this name. It's another strange thing. Okay, so
Something striking.
It's something striking. It's a truth about God here. At first, God says, hey, I'm the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which makes a ton of sense because Moses would have known those stories and he would have said, great, I'm glad I'm talking to the same guy because you made promises and you were trustworthy. But to then say, but what is your actual name? And to have him say something like, I am who I am, which is like in Hebrew, it's also kind of, it can mean a few different things. I will be who I will be, or it's like there's like some tense issues and stuff like that. But it's not a name.
I think it's a way of saying I don't need to have a name, right? Like I am who I am, like that. It just is. It's because I'm the mom. That's why, right? Like there's things that are implied by that. There's so much power in that. And I've taught the kids on this same subject, and I've said that to our kids. I'm like, if I just say I am, there is power in that. I don't need to explain anything else.
Yeah.
I just need to say I am.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the mic drop.
And then it does become his name, right?
Yes.
Like the divine name is essentially a form of that sentence, right? So you end up with a name that isn't a name that becomes the ultimate name. It's a weird moment.
Celebrities have tried it.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
But what do you think about that? Like, why would, like, what's the meaning of it? Other than like, look, I'm not falling for your categories. You can't put me in a box kind of thing. But like, I am who I am.
To me, I know you said I don't fit in your categories. But I do think Moses is coming from a background of where like status and titles matter significantly, right? Like he went from having a Hebrew mom to living in the palace, and he's raised around royalty and he's raised around Pharaoh, and certainly there's a lot of pomp and circumstance around this where it's like, oh, Pharaoh is the Pharaoh. Like there's a reason this title is ascribed to multiple men over generations. And to me, when God says this, it almost feels like he's saying, Moses, you got to reject everything that you understand about what's important and who has power in this moment, because I'm it. That's it. Like I am. Like there's nothing more you need to know. There's nothing more than what I am right here in this moment. And rejecting, I don't know, like the human brain of trying to like fit neatly into our categories. God says, I'm above the categories.
Yeah. Well, you got to think about the fact that if he's been in a country where they think the guy at the top is literally a god.
Yeah.
There's also something to that too, right?
Yeah.
To say, it's not just titles of status. It's like a truly divine status, and for God to say, no, it's just me. Like there's no one in a category like me. I'm being itself. You know what I mean? Like I'm eternally existent and always was and always will be, right? Like to have that in there when you've got a God that lives and dies and hands off his godhood to the next guy, right? Like there's something transcendent about that says, no, I'm not like one of the gods and those gods hold nothing against me, right? Like there's not even a comparison to that. is pretty profound. Especially when that God says, hey, those of you who were slaves to these other gods, guess what? I'm on your side. Right? Like that's like, it's not just like, wow, who knew Pharaoh was, claiming something he shouldn't. It's like, but that Pharaoh is killing my people. This God is going to rescue us. Like there's like something, if you internalize it, I will be with you. And that's the guy who's with you. That's a huge deal.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also, it shows a dependency on a little bit on that kind of storytelling nature of who God has been and who God will be. I think in some ways there's there's many times that we see in these books of the Bible where it's like, well, when your child asks you, like, why do we do this? Or what is this about? And there's a dependency on telling the story of what God has done. And so when you say, I am who I am, it implies all that has been. And if it's, I will be who I will be, well, it's all of the future of who I will be.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty infinite name.
Yeah.
Right there.
Well, when you in the New Testament, when you encounter the kind of like Greek translation of this, like they kind of try to paraphrase it in some ways. When you're reading in the book of Revelation and it says the God who was and who is and who is to come, most scholars would say that goes right back to this sentence, right? Like that's one way of capturing some of what's going on here. There's that eternal, from the beginning to the end, the whole story, I've got it all kind of idea.
Yeah. And he even says that, again, in verses 15, really, verse 15, where he says, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, of Jacob, has sent me to you. There's the past. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. There's a future.
Yeah.
I am.
What other observations you got?
All right, so there's a phrase that's repeated, it's 2 times in this passage, where God starts talking about the promised land, flowing with milk and honey. Like that, to me, that's just like a very specific detail.
Yeah.
That feels a little bizarre. And the whole time, by the way, while I'm reading this, I hear VeggieTales in my head of like singing about the promised land, and then I think Larry says, "Sounds sticky." That's
the joke.
Like, but milk and honey everywhere. It's great. It's like, there goes my New Year's resolution.
Diving into the world of food.
And I read that, and being the Iowa girl that I am, like. I appreciate agriculture, so whenever I read about milk and honey, I think, well, it's where the cows are and the trees are, right?
Yeah.
Like that's where you find the producers of milk and honey, which you would then have to have a really fruitful land to be able to have those things.
Yeah.
Or you can't have them.
Yeah, it is a funny image, right? And it does sound sticky. You're like, wow, that would be delicious. But it's like thinking about Willy Wonka, like the watching kids run around like the chocolate factory. It's like, that would be amazing. And then if you actually think about it, you're like, like how gross is
You're
this?
imagining like honey rivers. And
Augustus Gloop.
Right? And I'm like, hey, like in Iowa, that just means there's a lot of cows, and there are trees, and there are bees in the trees.
Yeah,
and there's honey
everyone's
everywhere.
sneakers are like squishing, or like you hear the stick coming off.
It's
the
a movie
floor,
theater floor. Yeah. It's gross. It's really gross. But there's also something to the image that's abundant.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you were slaves in a land that was mostly desert, except right along the river, to go to a place where you say, this is a place that's fertile. This is a place that's green. This is a place where things grow. Like that's a cool thing, right?
Yeah.
And to say it's yours, like this is the place that will sustain you, rather than the place where you will live and you'll serve and sustain other people. I mean, that's incredible. It's kind of the dream of like, oh, I have my own home. You know what I mean? Like it's saying to homeless, oppressed people, there's a place for you.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And it's going to be tasty.
It's Iowa.
It's Iowa.
Is this heaven? No.
Is that what we're talking
It's
about?
Iowa.
I think it's in Colorado. There's mountains here. Okay.
Oh, we're going to get a fight. And Illinois boy over here has no chance.
None.
Another observation I've got that comes up is the imagery of a mighty hand comes up a couple of times here at the end of the chapter. I think there was maybe some places earlier in the chapter it talks about that, but it definitely comes up a lot in the whole book of Exodus. There is this image of God using a strong arm, a mighty hand to compel Pharaoh to do something or to defend his people. it's really interesting. There's Egyptian background. I don't know if you like this, if you've ever seen like Egyptian hieroglyphics where there's like an image of, the pharaoh doing something. He's always got this staff holding out his arm. And it was like a symbol of the strength of Egypt, was like the arm of Pharaoh. And so basically God is co-opting that and saying, my arm's bigger. You know what I mean? Like I'm stronger, right? Like I've got this. And he's going to resist, but I'm going to get my way in the end. And so there's something even about the honesty of like, this isn't going to be easy, but don't worry, I got this covered. That's pretty cool.
I had a question mark next to the very last verse. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in her house for articles of silver and gold and for clothing, which you'll put on your sons and daughters, and so you will plunder the Egyptians. That doesn't even seem like plundering. That just seems like asking, like, hey, can I have all your things, and then we're gonna leave.
Then we're gonna go.
Yeah.
It feels like the application for today. That's what it is. Everybody ask your neighbors. You got any jewelry? Thanks.
The new model for women's men.
Yeah,
because it's every woman. It's not the
every woman.
Yes,
Yeah,
and it's like, what? Why the women? Are they more convincing? Is that like and then you're gonna put them on your sons and daughters, which I mean is on par. What mom isn't going to first give it to their kids? It's like, here's yours first, and help me out with that.
It happens later, like it comes true when they're leaving. It's still hard to explain. Like I've never really understood like what the motivation was, other than perhaps this. We'll read the story and you'll get this, but it gets rough for Egypt, and so at some point it might be like, look, whatever it takes to get you to go away. You know what I mean? Like a certain amount of, or if you remember these stories in Genesis, okay, these are the weird stories where Abraham will go down to Egypt and they'll take his wife, mostly because of Abraham being an idiot. But then when the Pharaoh or whatever ruler is like, oh, I thought, she wasn't your wife and I was going to take her to be part of my group or whatever. Like when he finds out, part of him making up for this thing that he shouldn't have done was giving gifts to Abraham, right, for doing that. And there's a certain amount of there's almost a symbolic like repayment for certain things. I don't know what would motivate the women to do this, like the Egyptian women, but it feels like in God's divine economy, it's like, hey, you didn't get paid for all these years. I'm going to make sure you get paid. And there's a little bit of that. And so when they go and they have gold to make all of their furnishings for the tabernacle, that's where the gold comes from. So it's a cool provision, but it's a weird detail.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to one of the M's in comma. Let's talk about meditation. And I think I'm going to go with the most famous verse in here. We're going to talk about God's name. I'm going to give you 45 seconds to ponder this sentence. If you need more time, go ahead and take it. God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. All right, let's talk about the other M in comma. Let's talk about message. How would you sum up one of the ideas from this passage in a sentence?
Mine's really simple and straightforward. The name of God is sufficient. It satisfies the need for every situation, and it's just, I just think that's really powerful. The name of God is sufficient.
Yeah, I was looking at, again, that non-answer to the question, right? When he says, who am I? And God says, I will be with you. And my message was, it's not about who I am, it's about who God is.
My message comes from that kind of early paragraph where it says, I've seen, I've heard, I'm concerned. And so I said this, God sees his people in the moments when they feel most unseen. So that compassion of God there. All right, let's talk about the A and comma application. What do we do in response to these things?
So my message was the name of God is sufficient. Should we go back?
We got that. No.
Okay.
We got that.
Right.
Sometimes you'll notice, folks, that we forget to change the
Some things are
the
manual.
thing.
Who's in charge of this, anyways? All right. So my message is the name of God is sufficient. So my application, I actually changed it while we were recording. So I was like, actually, I have a different application, but it's to ask the right question. So I think Moses asked the wrong question. He says, "Who am I?" Instead of saying, "God, will you be with me?" And so I was starting to think about my own life, and there are a lot of moments that I feel like Moses, and I think, gosh, who am I to do this? Like sometimes it's parenting as a dad, and we're walking through something with a kid, and I'm like, I don't know how to do it. Who am I to parent this kid? Or like sometimes I'm leading a team, or I'm pastoring in a situation, or I'm asked to do different things, and there's a lot of like imposter syndrome that can take over and be like, I'm just David. Like I'm, like who am I? And there are times I think I sort of look at God, I'm like, no, this doesn't make sense, and it's like, hey, that's the wrong question. It's not who is David, it's who is God, and will He be with you? And so actually, thank God for that truth. He will be with you if He's called you to do this. He will be with you. So ask the right question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, my message was, it's not about who I am, it's about who God is. And I was just looking at, again, those responses throughout the passage and the different postures that Moses takes. So everything from like raising your hand, like, here I am, like that posture of like being willing and raising your hand, kind of that posture of humility of taking off your sandals because what you're standing on is holy ground. The idea of who am I, having open hands, and then the idea that God kind of says like, I'm with you. There's a covering there. And then who are you? And that God would say, I am who I am. And it just made me think through, like, when I am praying, when I am in my time where I'm communicating with God, what postures am I taking, and how can I take those postures in really even an active way? If I were, I was thinking through, like, if I were teaching this to kids, I probably would use hand motions, right? I would say, like, and if you're listening, you can't see what I'm doing, turn on the YouTube. But I would say, so, like, it would be like, here I am. And we raise a hand and say, here I am. And do I stop in prayer in my time with God and say, okay, God, what are you asking me to do? Where are you calling out my name and that I need to go and be obedient? Where do I need to show respect to God and take on this posture of holiness? Where do I need to open-handedly say, like, who am I that you would, use me in this space? And where do I need to acknowledge that God is covering and that He is with me? He doesn't have to answer that question of who am I, because He says, I'm with you. And then where do I praise God and repeat His names to Him? He loves to hear those things, right? He wants to hear me say those things. So how am I answering that question of, who are you, and praising God for what He has done and then what He will do? So that was kind of my application, which is pretty specific, but maybe an active one that,
My message was, God seizes people in the moments when they feel most unseen. And so the application is pretty simple. It's to cry out to God. There is a lie that we believe that says when things get hard or when I feel overwhelmed, that in itself is a sign that God's not with me. And in some ways we should say that's the sign that I know God is most with me. That in those moments, that if God is anywhere, it's where people are hurting. And so consistently, from the very beginning of Scripture, we see that that's where God shows up. And so in those moments to say, even though my circumstances and my feelings say God can't possibly be with me, otherwise it wouldn't be like this, or what would happen, to actually believe the truth that, no, that's where God sees, that's where God hears, that's where God's concerned. He cares about those things. And so cry out because He hears you, and then have hope in the midst of it, because He doesn't leave you there, right? Like that's not where the story ends. Precisely because He's there, that means there are other places to go. He can lead you out of those things. But when you're in the midst of it, cry out. He hears you.
Thanks for hanging out with us. Join us again next Monday for a new episode where we'll be looking at another passage from the Bible Savvy reading schedule. And in the meantime, if you're not following along with the reading plan, check out BibleSavvy.com. Also, you can subscribe and leave a review on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Email us your questions or suggestions at podcast@BibleSavvy.com. Lastly, tell your friends, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.